will make more sense, though, in helping you understand which path you'll choose if you take a look at the technology itself. So here I am back on our server XD1, and as you can see here, I've got my Zen server stuff up here. I've got my Citrix Studio stuff up as well. I have created from our original Windows 8 template. I've just copied and pasted that template over to create another template called PVS Win8 template. Okay, I just wanted to create another template so that we'll be able to work with this a little bit later on. I show you this not because we're necessarily going to work with this just now, but because this is the template that will become that starting point by which all of our PVS images will be deployed. Let's begin first, however, by getting some of the pieces installed, the PVS bits installed onto this machine. I've mounted the PVS DVD to this computer, and so if I go here to that PVS DVD, you'll see our Provisioning Services installation. I can install the console here, which is the management console. I can install the server itself or the target device installation. This task here is something we'll actually tackle when we start working with that Windows 8 image. I'm going to start by installing the server here. I'm literally going to click Next, accept the EULA, click Next again. There's our customer information, and Next and Install. This is somewhat different from previous versions where we actually had to punch in all the initial configurations at the install or during the course of the install. Instead, what we'll be doing is entering that information as part of the initial configuration of Provisioning Services. Once we've installed the server, you'll notice that we actually need to get the PVS console installed onto this machine as well. And I can click back here and just literally install the console. Before doing that, however, here is the wizard that we need to populate. This wizard is going to give us a bunch of different options that mostly have to do with the networking configuration that needs to be set up. So you'll notice here that for DHCP services, I can choose either the service that runs on this computer, right? So a DHCP server on this computer. I can use the Provisioning Services boot P service or something else. Or I have a service that runs on another machine. It is my guess that in your environment, you probably already have DHCP services running on some other machine, most commonly on a domain controller. So let's actually run the service on another computer for now. Now, separate from the DHCP process is the actual PXE delivery process, that part that delivers that PXE boot device out or boot image out to machines as we end up booting them. So I first need to get my networking information, and then once I have the networking information, I'm on the network, the next step is to use those low-level network protocols like TFTP to download that PXE boot image. Well, I can do that through some other third-party solution, or I can use Provisioning Services PXE service. Separate from your DHCP server, which could be probably on your domain controllers here at this point, it's likely that you'll be using Provisioning Services as the mechanism for delivering these PXE boot files, these boot images, using TFTP. So I'm going to choose that the service runs on this computer, this Provisioning Services PXE service. Choose Next again. In this case, I'm going to create a new farm. Now, if you're familiar with the concept of farm, this farm has nothing to do with any kind of farms that may be associated with your XenDesktop environment. XenDesktop these days has kind of walked away very slowly from the notion of farms. And you'll notice that in XenDesktop we talk more about sites. Well, here in Provisioning Services we do need to create a farm, and this is a Provisioning Services farm. So let's create that Provisioning Services farm and connect it up to an available SQL database that we might have. So it can be SSX, it can be standard SQL, whatever you're looking for, or whatever you have available is something that we can use here. In our case, the database server we're going to use is XD1, and the standard instance and the standard TCP port here. I'm not going to set up a database mirror failover partner. But in a production environment, recognize that all of the database for this environment is something that needs to be highly available, because without that database, you're not going to be able to create new virtual machines. So having this as a highly available infrastructure is something you probably want to focus on as you start to roll additional users into this environment. I'll choose Next. And on this screen is where I can choose what the database name is, the farm name, the site name, and the collection name. Okay, so I'm just going to leave these as the defaults. You'll probably change them to something that's more appropriate to you. You can also check which Active Directory groups you want to use for security. In this case, we'll just choose administrators. What is my store name, and what will the default path be for the store? Now, this store is going to be the location where your images end up getting housed. And as a consequence, these images are going to be very large. This store is probably going to need to be a location that has plenty of available disk space because, again, the images can get fairly large and you don't want to run out of space. I'm going to create a default path here just on my C drive, just to make things easy. And the new folder I'm going to create is called PVS Store. Okay. You wouldn't, again, want to do this in production. Put this onto some storage area network somewhere and make sure you've got plenty of storage space available for it. Choose Next. Here's my license server name. This is what we have already configured as part of an earlier nugget. There's our license server, and I can choose here whether I want to use a network service account or a specified user account for how we end up connecting up. When you configure this, if you plan on using like a file share or other Windows offsite or network-based resources, it's probably a good idea to use a specified user account as opposed to a network service account for this use. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just, and again, we wouldn't do this in production, but in this case, I'm just going to use my username and password as the service account. Create yourself a service account that has the appropriate permissions to access all the network resources, and you'll be fine for getting through this particular page in the wizard. Choose Next again. And do I want to automate those computer account password updates? I can choose yes or no if I want here. And then I need to determine which of the network cards that I want to use for actually streaming out data or for performing management tasks. Now, the streaming process, as you can imagine, is something that can take quite a bit of network resources. When I boot up a virtual machine, I probably want that VM up and operational as fast as possible. And so Provisioning Services has a goal to get that or to facilitate that happening as quickly as possible, which can involve a large amount of network traffic. It is for this reason that we actually separate out the streaming network cards from the management network card in a production environment. And I could do multiple network cards if I want as well. So consider actually creating multiple physical network cards in this case if you plan on doing this, and monitor the network traffic that are going through those cards to ensure you've got enough resources, network resources to supply for the need or to meet your provisioning services needs. I'll choose Next again. And I can choose here whether or not I want to use the Provisioning Services TFTP service. Now, as I mentioned, the protocol that we use to transfer the boot image, that image that allows our device to boot, is TFTP. And if I have an existing TFTP server on the network, I can use it. In most environments, you probably don't have that in place. And it's probably a good idea just to use Provisioning Services TFTP service in order to keep things constrained to within that Provisioning Services environment. When I do that, you'll notice that the bin file that's used for booting is selected here, the ardbp32.bin. That bin file is something I would keep in my mind. I would be aware of that bin file name because it's something that you'll need to be conscious of as you start managing your environment and potentially even taking the exam. Choosing Next here allows me to configure the bootstrap file or the network configuration of that file that gets transferred off to my image. So when a device boots and needs to get itself an operating system, there needs to be information or network information in there that tells that device where to go to get the rest of the operating system. In this case, what we're looking for is the IP address of the Provisioning Services server, which is our server here, XD1, any subnet mask for it, and also a device gateway if we intend to include a device gateway. Now, in a lot of environments, in some environments, you might not want to provide a gateway here if you plan on constraining your provisioning services traffic to a single network. In some environments where you may be pushing provisioning services images out to physical devices around in your desktop world, well, then you'll need to include a gateway here so that you can configure that traffic or get that traffic out into other subnets. I will, just for completeness, add in our gateway here, which is 192.168.1.0 or 1.1. Choose OK. There are some advanced settings here as well if you want. For the most part, you're just not going to have to worry about these unless you're having issues. I'll choose Next again and Finish to begin the process of configuring provisioning services now that the installation is complete. Don't forget, if you're using Windows Firewall and it is enabled, to open up the necessary ports for PVS to work. This little note here is for. And with that, we begin the process of configuring provisioning services. So let me pause things for a minute. When we come back, we'll actually take a look at the Provisioning Services console. And we're back. So just a couple of minutes there to complete the initial configuration, and then I also went through and installed the Provisioning Services console as that separate installation. In production, you install the console onto your own desktop and not directly onto the server. You'll see here we have our farm XD1 here with our initial site, which is called site, and also our store, which is called store. So very basic empty framework here for the delivery of these provisioning services images. Now we're going to spend some time in the next nugget talking about the images themselves, how we prepare them, create them, and deliver them. But the one thing I want to kind of remind you of is where provisioning services fits within the greater architecture of XenDesktop itself. We've kind of talked before about how XenDesktop is kind of it's really your connection with the users. So if here's my user sitting up here, well, it is the XenDesktop infrastructure that delivers their applications and their desktops out to those users. Well, XenDesktop has the ability to connect up to a hypervisor. So here's my hypervisor using machine creation services, right? Machine creation services we've talked about before is that kind of Rosetta Stone that speaks both XenDesktop language and speaks the hypervisor language so that I can initiate actions on that hypervisor, like creating new virtual machines or copying and pasting templates, shutting down virtual machines or booting them up. Well, what we've done here by installing provisioning services is to create another connection that XenDesktop can make to a different pool of resources that is managed itself by provisioning services. So you can think of provisioning services almost like a kind of hypervisor management solution. In fact, one of the things that we'll be working with here very shortly in that upcoming nugget is how provisioning services can then provide the instructions to our hypervisor, our existing hypervisor. Provisioning services can also work with physical machines as well. So physical machines. So these physical machines can be managed by provisioning services, again, sitting out in our environment somewhere. I can use provisioning services to manage things like Blade PCs as well. And so provisioning services is a solution that sits kind of off and to the left from our hypervisor with the goal of providing resources to fulfill the machine catalogs that XenDesktop needs in order to provide services to our end users. In fact, one of the things you'll probably recall when we were originally creating our machine catalogs were some of the settings that were required in order to create that machine catalog. If I go here to create a new machine catalog, you'll notice that just like before, I can choose a Windows desktop operating system or a server operating system. But it's this next screen here which determines which of these avenues we end up going down for the actual creation of the virtual machines. So here we have machine creation services, which was the selection we chose originally. Next, in this upcoming nugget, coming up next, when we talk about how to actually deal with PVS virtual disks or vDisks, we're actually going to work with XenDesktop by associating it with provisioning services instead. And that's the action that creates all the connectivity to get our XenDesktop